Welcome into Courtside Seats with Kroeger, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. Here he is, Chris Kroeger.
Welcome in. It's Courtside Seats, and it is Chris Kroeger. I'm coming to you on the other side for the first time, the new play-by-play radio voice for the Charlotte Hornets, and this is our inaugural podcast, and we're going to be coming to you at least once a week, every week throughout the course of the year, and we're going to try to bring you some pretty honest, open, and candid conversations with those around the NBA, and specifically here with the Hornets, and so we're going to open it up. It's draft week. Who better to talk to than the new man on the job, president of basketball operations, general manager for the Charlotte Hornets, Mitch Kupchak. Mitch, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
I told you we were going to talk about you for a little while. Is that okay? Does that make you feel uncomfortable? How does that make you feel?
Well, I understand where you may feel you have to, but I prefer we talk about the Hornets.
Okay.
Because I'm excited about the Hornets. This is an exciting time. Not only do we have the draft coming up, but we've got a coach who we think is going to do a really, really good job providing, the general manager gets some players that he could coach. So we've got a coach. We're excited. We're excited about the way we're going to play. We have the draft coming up in a couple of days, and after that, we've got the ability to look to make a trade. You got free agency, and you got summer league. So it's a very, very exciting time of the year.
So let's talk about the last 4 months. They going by quick? Have it been a slow 4 months as we build towards this draft on Thursday night? How's it gone?
Very quick. The time just seems to fly by. For me, a lot of it's been catching up. I've been out of a formal position for about a year. Having said that, I've watched a lot of games, a lot of college games. I've gone to a lot of college games. I feel I know the college players. I've watched a lot of NBA games, so I feel, in tune with the game, the way it's changing and the way the college game has been played this past year. Yet I've been away, so there is a degree of catching up when you get here. Clearly, we made a coaching change, and that took a long time, to go through 8 or 9 interviews. Sometimes we had to fly to different cities to interview, the different coaches that we were trying to select and make a selection from. So a lot of work, a lot of time, days just kind of folded into the next day, weeks into the next week, and here it is. It's the draft is just a couple of days away. It's been busy, but it's been very challenging and very fun.
That 4-month stretch you're talking about, obviously James Borrego, JB, our new head coach, but the other part of that is you've got a new basketball operations staff in place too, really, right? So how do you flesh out from you're the top of the pyramid, so to speak, as president of basketball operations. So what falls underneath that, and how do you? I mean, that's a lot to take on. So how do you even start? Where do you start other than a head coach? What have you built in place over the last 4 months?
Well, you have to prioritize, everything because there's no way, you could address everything in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the first month. Okay, taking this job, I felt clearly, for obvious reasons, once we let Coach Clifford go, the number one primary task at hand was to find the next head coach for the Charlotte Hornets. And that took about a month, a long process. We also continued to work on other parts of what we felt need to be addressed. We did make changes into the medical group, new trainers, new strength and conditioning coaches, and so forth and so on. We're going to make additions to that group. But getting the head trainer, in addition to interviewing all the other positions, was the most important thing. And we do feel we've got a great head coach in Jim Borrego, and we feel we have an excellent trainer, our head of our medical department, in Joe Sharp. So having those two positions covered, it allows them to look to fill out their staff, and both of them work with me and Buzz Peterson closely on filling out their staff, whether it's an assistant coach or a video director, video coordinator, an analytics expert, and then, of course, Joe Sharp to fill out the rest of his staff. But once you have the head guy, the rest, you feel a level of comfort that filling out the group is going to become easier, and then you can move on to the next thing. So there is a timeline. Right now, it's the draft. And also, there's a lot of trade talk associated with the draft. So that takes priority over anything else. After the draft, there'll continue to be trade talk up until July 1st. And then July 1st will be the beginning of free agency. And that starts another segment of this calendar, that an NBA franchise goes through every year. And then, of course, once again, after that, we go into Summer League, which is 5 days of practice here in Charlotte, and then 10 to 12 days in Las Vegas.
Have you missed that rhythm of just that segment of kind of every few weeks, every few months, you're on to that next task? Have you missed that rhythm over the last year?
There's good parts of it and not good parts of it. I enjoyed the last year immensely. Kind of being able to plan your own day. My son's at Santa Barbara, and he plays for the team up there, so I went to all their games. I went to some of their practices. I went to their away games. I traveled here to North Carolina, watched the Tar Heels play several times in Chapel Hill. I was here in Charlotte for the first round. And then I visited. My mom is actually 94 years old today. So in New York, so I went to see. I would usually just go there for a night or two, but now I go for a week or two and just kind of hang out with her. I had the time, so it was great having the freedom to kind of do some things on your bucket list. I did a lot of that also, but yeah. I missed, the part about building something, competing, working with the staff, working with players. Being vested in a game, I miss that, and I'm just ecstatic and fortunate, that the Hornets and Michael gave me this opportunity.
So I found this really interesting. You and I have talked about this before, but your competitive nature. And a few weeks ago, more than that now, when you introduced JB as head coach, and the speculation of will this roster be blown up? Will it be torn down? And you kind of put an end to that right there and said, we're moving forward with this team. We hired him to coach this group of players as currently constructed. That's not in your DNA, is it? The idea of losing a lot and maybe tearing something down all the way down to the studs to build it back up. That's kind of today's NBA for a lot of teams. But you were pretty matter of fact that you want to compete, and you want to compete with this roster, and that's why you brought in JB to be the coach.
Well, as a general manager, you do have to have some vision, and as competitive as I know Michael is, and I feel I'm pretty competitive as well. We do want to win every game. We want to make the playoffs next year. But I do have a job to look into the future beyond just next year. And then you have to evaluate your roster and your, salary structure to determine really what you can do and what you can't do and what the course of action is going to be. I mean, you may want to hit the reset button and rebuild and start from scratch. But if you look at your roster, you may say, well, that really can't happen in 1 year. That might take us 2 or 3 years to get to that point. In this business, you really can't come in and, decide what you're going to do and then snap your fingers and it happens. Even with draft picks, even if you've got really, really high draft picks for the next 3 or 4 years, you're going to be ecstatic about having those picks, but you're probably going to draft 3 19-year-old players. And it's going to take 3 or 4 years, unless you get maybe a number one pick, and you get the best player. It's probably going to take 3 or 4 years for those kids to grow and develop where they can actually help you win games. So at times it can be frustrating. Because you do want to win. I know ownership wants to win. The fans want us to win. But at the same time, you have to have some vision. You have to have a plan. And hopefully if you have a plan, you articulate it, to your fan base, and they can see it and they understand it. I think that's the most, we have a word we use, everybody uses it, transparent. Yes, you got to try to be transparent with people because they're smart enough to understand if you're not. Mm-hmm. So it's a challenge. And, right now I think we do have a group, barring any kind of change here, before the beginning of the season, that can be very competitive, especially with our 2 rookies from last year. I expect them both to make a contribution. I'm hopeful that this year's number 11 pick will make a contribution, and I think we can have a nice, fun team to watch next year.
Mitch, do you remember your first, time hearing about James Borrego or meeting James Borrego? When did you first, I guess, run in the same circles with one another, even before you chose him to be your head coach?
The first time I met him is when we interviewed him this year.
How did you?
I've known of him.
Yeah.
He started in San Antonio and moved to New Orleans, and I've known Monty Williams, and one of the assistants there was a guy I played with in North Carolina, Dave Hanners, who was an assistant to Monty and worked with Coach Borrego. And then he went to Orlando, and and then he went back to San Antonio, and of course he was actually a head coach in Orlando for 30 games. And of course I knew that. I've watched him coach. So in this league, you get to know from afar a lot of people when you meet. But the first time I met him 2 months ago.
What stood out right away?
I didn't know what to expect at first because I didn't know him. I felt a little bit like he was nervous, and I almost sensed that he was feeling that this might be one of his last chances to come to bat. That wouldn't have been true. So I felt a little bit of that at the beginning.
Did you say that? Did you communicate that to him?
No, I didn't. The most impressive thing was, this guy had the game nailed. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, how he wanted the team. He knew each one of our players. And it's not that he had an opinion on everybody. He had the exact same opinion that I did and that I feel that ownership had. So the vision was really, identical. He understands the game. I think he's really smart. Player development, which is a key. He understood. He's building relationships with the front office, with the players. So I just felt by the end of the interview, I walked out and I said to myself, this guy, right now is at the top of our list. Now, we interviewed a couple more people, and then we brought him back to Charlotte, and he spent time with Buzz Peterson. Buzz was a little under the weather at the time, so we went out to his house. I wanted Buzz to get to know him as well. And then the next day, we flew to Jupiter, and he got in front of the owner, Michael Jordan, and spent about 3 or 4 hours, getting to know each other and also talking basketball. So I was, very comfortable, and when you're going after a coach, this is his first time around. You always kind of say, well, is this the right thing? Sometimes you say, well, let me get somebody who's more established, that everybody knows his name. But, once, we got through that second interview, it didn't matter to me, what his name was. He was the guy.
Do you remember what Michael's reaction was? What Michael thought about him at that time?
James, JB, our coach, we traveled there together. We took the car to Michael's house together, and then we left together. So I didn't have any feel for what Michael was thinking. I knew the conversation flowed well. But the next morning, about 10 o'clock, Michael just called me, and he said, Mitch, he's the guy. I agree. So
it's a pretty good endorsement.
Yeah, and we talked, for about 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But we basically, slept on it. There wasn't really a point where I could pull him aside, and I didn't want to. I think it was important that we both slept on it, or that Michael slept on it. And maybe he knew right away he was the guy, but we didn't talk about it till the next day.
Welcome back to Courtside Seats with Kroeger. It's Kroeger, and we're talking with Hornets General Manager, President of Basketball Operations, Mitch Kupchak. It's our first ever edition of Courtside Seats here, a Charlotte Hornets podcast, and talking to Mitch about a variety of things, talking about what he's done on the job through the first 4 months as GM for the Hornets, and going to get a little personal. Let's talk about his journey through the game of basketball, started all the way on Long Island, and how he wound up at North Carolina playing for Dean Smith and the Tar Heels. Let's talk about you for a little bit. Is that okay? All right.
If we're not running out of time.
Yeah, no, we got time. Let's talk about you for a little bit. I want to know, how does a guy like you from Long Island wind up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina? What happened there?
Dean Smith. It's as simple as that. The other school that was pretty big at the time was Notre Dame. Digger Phelps was coaching at Fordham, and he had a couple of good years there, so he recruited me to Fordham, and then he went to Notre Dame. which would have been my junior year in high school. So he recruited me at Notre Dame. And in New York at that time, Notre Dame was had a big presence as a school. My dad wasn't really a sports fan, but he knew Notre Dame. So I felt that was, with Digger, and they had rebuilding a program. And so it came down to North Carolina and Notre Dame. Was
one program in the lead more than the other at that time, or were you 50-50?
It was probably 50-50. And then, sometimes I'd lean towards Notre Dame. And, I talked to my high school coach, and, I'd lean the other way. And, John Lotz was the person who recruited me. Who was one of the assistants in North Carolina. And then when Dean Smith, walked into my high school gym, every head in the gym turned. And this is 1971. So, he didn't have the status he did in 1981 or 91, when he was legendary. But even then, it was, they were coming off 3 trips to the finals. And, if you're a basketball fan, everybody knew who Dean Smith was. And then he came into my home and met my mom and dad. And the one thing I remember most of all is that it was the first year of the freshman eligibility rule. Up until then, up until 1971, and you could only play varsity basketball when you're a sophomore, junior, or senior. My year, they did away with the rule. And a lot of the schools didn't know, and a lot of the coaches didn't know how to handle the rule. And they used it as a recruiting tool. To freshmen. And if you come to my school, you're going to play a lot, or you're going to start. You'll start right away as a freshman. And, to a kid in high school, that's impressive to hear a coach, say something like to you. But Coach Smith never said that. We kind of pressed him on, what were the chances that I was going to play. And his response was, you'll have an equal opportunity to earn your minutes. He said, I'll guarantee your parents that you're going to graduate. You're going to go to study hall your first year. You're going to go to church your first year. A church of your choosing, some place to worship. And if you work hard, you'll play. So I kind of like the idea of knowing that if he's telling me that, then he's probably telling everybody else that.
And he did tell everybody else that.
I think so. To me, that meant a level playing field. And some of the other schools that were promising me to play as a freshman, you start to say, well, what is he promising the other kids? Is he promising that because everybody can't play?
Yep.
So I liked that. I also liked the uniforms. The uniforms are kind of cool.
The Argyle, is that what sold? The colors, what was it?
Well, the V-neck.
Yeah.
And then the little belt buckle, down here. And then we had the socks that went up to your knee with your number on it. That was kind of cool.
Well, and, you go there and you play with, Bobby Jones, George Karl, Walter Davis, some guy named Phil Ford who got to play a lot as a freshman. He was pretty good.
He did.
Yeah. What do you remember most about those days?
It's all good. Having said that, we didn't, if I look at some of the things that, that's covered the length of my career, I had a pretty good high school, and, the NBA has been really, really good to me. But we did not advance in the NC2As. We didn't win a championship. The furthest my teams got, the teams that were on, were the regionals. And we got beat in the final regional game. So we didn't even go to a Final Four. Now, the rules were different then. There were no at-large bids. You had to win your tournament to get an invite. So there weren't, whatever it is, 68 teams invited to the NC2A like there are today. There were just, I believe, 32. So we had a couple of years where we won 24, 25 games, and we couldn't even get an invite to the NC2A. Okay, today, out of the ACC, there might be 8 or 9 teams that get invited. And the other 2 teams that were really good back then were NC State and Maryland.
Yep.
So it was a great time to be a college basketball fan in the ACC. NC State was dominant, Maryland was dominant, and then we were also really, really good. But only one of those teams can go play.
It's Courtside Seats with Kroeger. I'm Kroeger. Welcome back. We've been talking with Hornets General Manager, President of Basketball Operations, Mitch Kupchak, been with us on our first ever edition of Courtside Seats. Of course, we'll try to bring you a new episode at least once a week, every week throughout the course of the year. And we're going to wrap up our conversation with Mitch covering a wide array here. His journey from North Carolina to the NBA by the Washington Bullets, leaving the Bullets after an NBA championship to go to LA in free agency, and of course how a knee injury took him from player to being a front office executive, and now what he's doing as he prepares for the NBA draft coming up in just a matter of days here with the Hornets. Listen in. You get offered a lucrative contract, a long contract to go to LA. Did you think long and hard about that? Was it an easy decision, hard decision to leave Washington to go to LA, or did it just seem like the right move at the time?
The Lakers made it an easy decision.
Yeah.
Free agency changed. When I became a free agent, they did away with the reserve clause. Up until then, there was free agency. It was restricted. And if you signed with another team, the two teams had to work out compensation between the two of them. And if they couldn't work out compensation, it would go to the commissioner, and the commissioner would award compensation. So that was a scary thing for a lot of teams to go through. My year, they did away with that. So fortunately for me, the Lakers, made me an offer that, was pretty dramatic. And the Bullets, and I met with their owner about it, A. Poland. We had a great relationship. Mm-hmm. But from a financial point of view, we'd love to keep you, but we can't. It wasn't really close. The decision itself was made for me, but the ties, I spent 5 years in Washington. We went to the finals twice. It was close to New York and close to North Carolina. For the first 28 years of my life, I was an East Coast kid. So it was kind of an adjustment, for me to start thinking about California, and whatever that meant. Whenever we went to California with the Bullets, we stay at a hotel near the airport, and we take a shuttle to the Forum, which is like 3 miles away, and then after the game, you go back to the airport hotel. So that's really all I knew about California. It was just the shuttle and the airport. So it was, way out there for me to start saying, I'm actually going to live in California. And the way I got through it was I would say, well, I'll just come back and live on the East Coast during the summers. Which is what I did for a couple of summers, and then slowly, I ended up, in California. But a great experience. We did a lot of good things in Los Angeles. I wouldn't trade it for the world. So, I don't think everybody can say that about, their experiences in life. I had a great experience, and I'm looking forward for the same thing here.
You have your knee injury. You played, 60 games, I think, over the span of 3 years in that time. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's when your sort of, internship under Jerry West began? Is that when it started, this idea of, you transitioning into life after basketball and as an executive? When did that whole process begin? Well,
my first year in L.A., I blew out my knee, which at the time was an ACL. They didn't really know how to repair them then. And I did have surgery, reconstruction. It was an experimental kind of thing. And the doctors said it's going to take a couple of years for you to get back on the court, if you get back on the court. So I knew I had to rehab every day. I also knew I might not come back. I knew the Lakers were paying me for several more years, and I knew I had a lot of free time. So I enrolled in UCLA's business school, not knowing what would happen. And, I took classes in their MBA program and was working towards, the degree when I was able to come back and play. Now, I did come back and play. But I had a big brace, and I wasn't, in my mind, very athletic. And, I made a contribution. I was a backup. But I just felt an obligation to the Lakers because of what they were paying me to give it my best effort. So I made it back and played parts of 3 more years. I re-injured my knee, had another surgery. But I continued to work on my MBA there. And, where it would lead, I had no idea. I really didn't. And then one day after my 3rd year back, Jerry West came to me and said, Mitch, I can use some help in the front office. I watch you run up and down the court, getting iced and, re-injuring your knee every 3 or 4 months. He said, you don't have to do that. He said, I could use some help in the front office. So really, that's all I needed to hear. That was 1986, and I called my representative, my agent, Larry Fleischer, and he said, Mitch, if it's what you want to do, I'll work something out, with the Lakers, and we'll go from there. So they worked it out, and I retired in August of 1986, and I went into the front office in September 1986. So I wasn't away from basketball for more than a month.
Did you ever think of yourself as, I don't know if you want to use the term scout, but as a talent evaluator or a coach? Or did you ever think of yourself outside of your playing career in those ways, or did you never put your mind to that spot?
I had an opportunity to get into coaching as an assistant, and the lifestyle, to my understanding, was every 3 or 4 years, even if you were lucky, you were going to get fired and have to move on. And because if you have 3 or 4 years or 5 years as a head coach in this league, that's a pretty good run.
Yep.
So I thought there was more stability in management, and more importantly, Jerry West was the one who asked me to work with him. So, I'm not sure how I can turn down that opportunity and move into an assistant coaching job somewhere else. So to me, it was a no-brainer. Management was the way. And to some degree I was preparing myself for it, but I really didn't know that that's how it was going to play out. And Jerry was great. I mean, he was just the very, very best. Now, when I tell the story that he looked at me and said, I can use some help in the front office, part of me wants to say that I think he needed the roster spot.
Yeah.
Okay. So I kid him about that all the time, and he just kind of laughs with me. And
do you remember who took the roster spot?
Eventually, it was Michael Thompson.
Okay, that's not a bad selection right there.
But it was later, so it could not have been planned. But I kid him about it, and he kind of laughs about it, and obviously I can't say it's not true, and I can't say it is true, but it makes for a good story.
It was about, I guess a little bit more now, but it was, this is 10 years ago. You made the trade for Pau Gasol. That would have been, February of 2008, I believe, at the time. I think that trade, I've said this, I think that trade's arguably one of the biggest trades in modern NBA history, and it was one that I still don't know if 10 years later gets enough attention for what you did.
The timing was right for us. We had a young kid named Andrew Bynum who was 20 or 21 that season. He was getting 16, 17 rebounds, 20 points a game. And as a team, we were really playing well. And this was on the heels of when Kobe indicated publicly that he didn't feel that we could win there. So it was really important, that we get a good start. And Andrew Bynum got us out of the gate like nobody could. It was just so much fun to watch this kid. Then in January, he goes down with a knee injury, and he's lost for the season. So we're looking at, our season at that point. Now we had, Lamar Odom still, and I think we had Derek Fisher, so we still had a pretty good team. But then in February of that year, like a month after Andrew Bynum went down, Pau Gasol became available. He was young. He was incredibly talented. He had really good years in Memphis, and the time was just right that we were able to make a deal.
But nobody really saw that coming. That's one of the great, I think, surprises is how great of a trade it was. You went to 3 straight finals. You win 2 of those.
That's right, yeah.
And really, nobody saw it coming.
Well, we felt good about it. I know Memphis, took some heat, from making the trade. We always felt good about it. The thing that people don't really realize or think about too much, but they'll remember now that I say it, what we traded to Memphis was Kwame Brown, and we traded 2 first-round picks and the rights to a second-round pick that we had drafted 2 years earlier. And the rights to that play was Marc Gasol. Okay, so Mark, obviously looking back on it, makes that a pretty good deal for Memphis.
Yep.
At the time, nobody was thinking that way. But Marc Gasol turned out to have a heck of a career. He's still playing. So, GMs don't plan it that way where both sides are happy. We always want to get the best part of a deal. But when you look back on it, if both sides end up happy, that's a good deal.
Do you remember what Kobe thought after the trade?
He was ecstatic.
Yeah. He was very vocal at that time, like you were saying. He was very vocal, and you always took that in stride. I think a lot of GMs wouldn't have done that, but you always took it in stride.
Ownership was really stable. Dr. Buss, he had a calmness about him. And, he got rattled, but he never really, lost it and made decisions irrationally or out of anger or, being upset or anything. He was always very calm. Had a great feel, for the business and for the game of basketball. He let, the experts, do the draft and, select the players. He was a fan of the game, so he always had an opinion. Incredibly, bright and innovative in terms of entertainment and bringing, the game of basketball, not only just about basketball, but it's an entertainment package. People come to a game, and sometimes even if it's not a great game, they're happy because it's a fun experience. But I think his calmness, helped everybody get through those times. You always felt like, even though it was, a lot of negative or controversy in the press, nothing like it is today with the internet and social media, but even back then, you always felt that, nobody was ever going to panic.
Did Kobe, almost in a way, that drive, he was always vocal about wanting to win, that competitive nature, did that make you a better GM in a way, where you always had to be even more so evaluating your roster and thinking about
what he kept you on your toes.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have to be reminded that I'm competitive.
Yeah.
Because he's competitive. I mean, I always felt I'm competitive. I mean, I like to play. I played hard, I thought, and I wanted to win. But he kept you on your toes. Absolutely. When you walked in the gym every day.
Yeah.
You better be ready.
Well,
if he asks you a question, you better have the answer. You better say the right thing. He walks in the gym. There's a certain sense of, I'm not sure what the word is, but you have to be prepared or ready, a readiness. With him around, he's not a wallflower. He didn't just fade into the wall.
I think of the word, especially when I think of those Lakers teams, your Lakers teams with the Showtime Lakers, people throw around the word culture all the time. And it almost bothers me because it gets thrown around very loosely. But I would argue very few teams have culture in the NBA. I think San Antonio very clearly. I'd argue Pat Riley has put that together in Miami throughout the years. How do you get to that point? What's the origin of that? How do you foster it? How do you build it?
It's all about winning, but it starts at the very, very top. And I talked, briefly about ownership in Los Angeles, and the ownership situation here is exactly the same. Okay, you have very stable ownership here in Michael Jordan. He's very competitive. He wants to win, and he understands the game, and he understands the business. He'll look at our roster, and he'll think the same way I think when I look at our roster. Sometimes, there's a time to move quickly, and sometimes it's just going to take some time. So he's a seasoned owner, and that's where it starts. Now he hires people to work for him and to report for him, and it's those people's jobs, whether it's the coach or the general manager, continue to create the culture that he creates, which is being stable and winning, understanding, being fan-friendly, and that just starts at the top and works down. Now, I've got a job to do. Our coach has a job to do. Our trainer has a job to do. Our scouts have a job to do, and that's to create an environment where we bring players to a coach. Hopefully we've hired the right coach, and we can win. So that's what the culture is all about to me. In any culture, there are things you see as a manager or as an owner or as a head trainer or as a head coach that you don't like to see. And everybody knows what they are. You can't tolerate that, whether it's any business. So that can't be tolerated, and that has to be addressed right away. That's not a secret.
So you talk about things trickling down, but you take things into the locker room. There's got to be buy-in in that locker room, and there's got to be ownership at that level, correct? I mean, you need your best players to buy in and set that same tone where they're at.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And once again, that starts at the top. It drops to me as a general manager, and then it'll fall to the coach. As the coach, to create a newness or an environment or a culture, which is a word that's much overused, I believe, where everybody buys in. And I think that's what we have today. we have players that come in every day. They work hard. It's only June, okay, and we have 8 or 9 guys coming in every day. And not just guys that are looking for playing time next year or rookies, but Marvin's coming in, Kemba is coming in every day and working. So the newness is there, the buy-in is there, and once again, we hope we draft a good player. Maybe there's an opportunity to improve our team via a trade or free agency at some level. But get through the summer, get through Summer League, continue to work and develop these young kids. Hopefully the veterans continue to come in. And then we assemble around Labor Day and, have 3 weeks of camp, 5 preseason games. And then it's about winning. That's as simple as that. If you get off to a good start and you're winning more than you're losing, the buy-in continues to grow. The culture gets better because you're winning. So that's how it works, and I really believe it starts at the top, and that's with very stable and understanding and competitive ownership.
Well, Mitch, we'll wrap up with the draft. You've been doing this for so long. I know the technology and maybe the process of the draft has changed over the years, but maybe those same non-negotiables you always have had as a GM, are they the same today in what you're looking for in a player that they were 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago?
Well, every year is different because you don't know what pick you're going to have. And if you're picking in the late 20s, that's different than picking at 11 or different than picking at 2. Okay, we picked at 2 3 years ago, and it was kind of easy because it was, Simmons from Philadelphia or Brandon Ingram, who's with the Lakers now. So if Philadelphia took Ingram, then we were going to take Simmons, and if they took Simmons, we were going to take Ingram. So that's kind of easy. This draft at 11 is different. But basically they're 19-year-old players that you have to project out a little bit. There's a couple of kids who are, there's one for sure who's 22 that we'll look at, and there's a couple other ones that are older. So every year is different. The process, is the same. We do feel we're going to get a really good player with the 11th pick this year, and we're spending a lot of time on it right now. We're almost done. We have a couple more workouts. We're working on the board right now, grouping players, weeding out players, vetting the process, so to speak. So we feel we're going to get a good player.
And at 11, I think that should be a rotational player in today's NBA. Maybe not right away, but a guy that can develop into that. Is that fair or unfair? No, it's fair. Absolutely. If you get the right guy, it could be a starter. Yeah.
Last year, I think at 11, they got, Malik Monk,
yep.
Who didn't play much in the middle of the season, for various reasons, but I think he ended up pretty strong. And he's been coming in here every day for the last 3 or 4 weeks working. Is Malik going to end up being a starter? He certainly can be. But he may be, as you said, a rotational player that comes off the bench. But at 11, you should get a guy who's going to be, a top 8 player. Maybe not a starter, but certainly a top 8 or 9 player who's going to contribute for 10 years.
Well, Mitch, it is a pleasure. Thank you for being our first guest on our podcast, President of Basketball Operations, General Manager for the Hornets, and you are welcome back anytime. Thanks for putting up with me for a little while.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's our conversation with Hornets GM, President of Basketball Operations, Mitch Kupchak, covering a wide array of things over the course of the last 30 minutes or so, and I think we got a lot more to cover when we check back in with Mitch, hopefully, over the course of the next few months, and we are days away from the NBA Draft. It's been Courtside Seats, our new podcast with the Charlotte Hornets, and because we like you guys so much, we'll be back on Friday after the NBA Draft. We'll be recapping the pick. We'll have a conversation with that draft pick at number 11 for the Charlotte Hornets, and we'll be here each and every week. Courtside Seats with Kroeger, a Charlotte Hornets podcast.